Today we're making a beautiful redwood sign. Check it out. We got a lot of great projects coming up like this, guys, so don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button, do us a favor, click that little bell icon, and then you'll see everything that we got coming up. Jeff over at Bullhead City Fire Department reached out to me. They're doing a fundraiser to raise money for Christmas for kids. We talked about what he wanted, and this is what I came up with. So this is gonna auction off and hopefully raise a bunch of money for kids for Christmas over in the Bullhead area. So to put this together, we're using our large Maltese Cross red line stencil. This is the stencil of the month for January 2024. And then for the lettering, we use the 1.5 and 2-inch Clarendon letters. Let's get going. So everything we're using today, we're going to put links in the description below so you can go check them out.
To make this board, we use 2x6 redwood lumber from Lowe's or Home Depot, I can't remember. And then we use the table saw to take off that easy edge, which is basically just the rounded edge that you get with milled lumber. We also ran it through the joiner on one side, but like an idiot, I forgot to film that. Now we're using these new Rhoten compression clamps, and we really like them. They take some getting used to. It's not as easy as just bar clamps, but we're kind of getting used to them, and we're gluing up bigger stuff, and these things are pretty cool. So we're going to have a full video coming out on a review of these things in the near future. So for this sign, Dad really wanted to do the same edge we did on the Batman sign, which is just a massive chamfer with a circular saw. So really it's pretty simple. All you gotta do is set up a straight edge and then set your circular saw at a 45-degree angle and cut all 4 sides. You just gotta make sure your measurements are dead on, otherwise it's gonna be kind of funky. When you have a large sign like this, it's a good idea to do your layout in steps. So Dad did the Maltese Cross, or the firehouse cross, whatever you want to call it, and he did that first. So he wanted to make sure that it's centered, and then he marked it because these stencils sometimes they bow, and we're using this double-sided tape here to make sure that it sticks down nice and flat for the primer. I'll leave a link for all this stuff in the description, including that double-sided tape, because that stuff is awesome. Then he's masking off, and he's going to block off where the letters are going to go. That way he makes sure he doesn't get any overspray on them. Now he's marking the center of the lines where the arches are going to go. Now the tricky thing about this is, once you center your arch and to draw your line, you have to make sure that you measure each side. That way it's not cockeyed. If it's cockeyed, that's really going to throw the whole look of the sign off. And if your lettering is going to go farther than our arch allows, you can just extend it by following the line like Dad's doing here. Once your lines are drawn, then you just throw your letters on there, and you just got to space them out. Again, don't space them out too wide because that's going to make it look really, really weird. Notice that Dad taped the edges because we're not sure if we're going to paint those black or if we're going to paint them red or what we were going to do at this point. So just to be on the safe side, Dad masked it off to make sure that no overspray got on them. We started off with a profile bit at 3/16 of an inch deep. Now Dad did this mainly because he wanted to make sure that there's enough room around the stars to carve at 3/16. Remember guys, if you're not sure how something is going to carve, start out a little bit shallower than you would normally do it. It's always easier to go back around a little bit deeper later on than it is to mess something up and then you have repair work you have to do, or you might even have to start all over. So start out a little shallow, you can always go back around. Now there's areas around the profile of this cross that are pretty thick, but then there's areas that are real thin. So Dad decided to do this with a profile bit just to make sure he gets his main line done. Then he's going to go around all the stripes and the stars, and we're going to go back with the 90-degree bit to make sure that our background is consistent. You can definitely tell, even though it's sprayed black, that there's different types of textures in the background. So you want to try to stay consistent throughout the entire sign. Notice that Dad turned the sign on the bench. That way, for the long straight lines, he's actually pulling the router towards him. It is way easier to keep a consistent straight line when you're pulling the router as opposed to when you're going from side to side. So if you have the ability to turn your board, if it's not a massive board, then that's definitely a better way to go. He also made his first line of carving, the Bullhead City part, upside down, and he did that so he's not having to lean over the bench to carve. I'll be the first to admit, I have a really hard time with this. For some reason, just in my mind, carving upside down, it just seems weird. But this is something that you want to be able to get used to. I'm working on it. In case you're doing a large board, and that way you don't have to lean over and you don't have to really kind of stretch and be uncomfortable as you're carving. So having the ability to carve your letters upside down is definitely a plus, and if you've never done it, you might want to get used to it. It helps a lot. Once all the profile work was done, then Dad put the 90-degree bit in at 1/4 of an inch deep. Now normally this goes really fast, but this took Dad a little bit of time because this board was pretty grainy. But basically, Dad's just making a cloud around the lettering, and he's kind of following the contours of the letter, and then he's going back and taking out all of the wood that's inside that cloud. It looks really nice when it's done, and for me, I personally like Outset quite a bit better. Now he's going to take the 90-degree bit and he's going to go and remove all of the wood inside the cross. Now Dad did not go back around at 1/4 of an inch deep with the profile before he did this. But if you're a beginner, it's a good idea to do that, to give yourself a little bit more room. Dad's been doing this a while, so this was not a big deal for him. At this point, we still didn't know what we were going to do with the edges, so Dad masked those off to keep any overspray from getting on them before we sprayed this. One of my favorite things about what we do is that in the middle of projects, they kind of evolve. Like, you have an idea of what you want, then as you start working on it, it's like, you know what, let's try this. Well, let's do this. So it really is kind of cool to see what a project starts off in your mind as, and then what it ends up being. Once all the spray was dry, then Dad just sanded it off with an 80 grit disc on the disc sander and a 120 on the random orbital. We ended up spending a whole day just letting this thing dry and putting coats on it throughout the day. So this entire sign, once it was done, had about 12 coats of clear on it. And the nice thing about that is you allow it to build up. I'm super impatient and I hate waiting, but it was definitely the right call. Then Dad painted the red line on here with our one-shot paint. Remember, you got to put your clear on there before you paint. That way if there's any drips, it's easy to clean off. If you try to paint first and you get drips on some areas, that's going to be rough. You're going to have to sand that off.
So there you go, guys. I could not be happier with the way this came out. This edge is something that we did on the Batman sign way back when, but I wanted to do it natural this time to really show off that redwood grain. But I am so happy with the way this came out. You guys, if you haven't tried this deep chamfer using the circular saw, it really adds something special, especially if you've got a big thick board. Hopefully it'll raise a bunch of money over in the bullhead area for the kids for Christmas. Thanks so much for watching, guys. We so appreciate you. We will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.